My mother has a way of introducing me that feels like an apology. Not to me, to whoever she's talking to. It goes something like, and this is my younger daughter. She works in, computers, I think. And then she laughs a little, the way you laugh when something doesn't quite make sense to you, and the conversation moves on. I used to correct her. I'm a software engineer, Mom. I build infrastructure systems. I stopped correcting her around the time I turned 30, which was also around the time I realized she wasn't confused. She just didn't think it mattered enough to remember correctly. My sister's husband is an orthodontist. My mother can tell you the name of his practice, the intersection it's on, how many staff he employs, and what he charges per set of aligners. She learned all of that within 6 weeks of my sister bringing him home for the first time. I've been at the same company for 4 years. My mother calls it that tech thing. I want to be clear that I'm not telling this story to make anyone feel sorry for me. I'm telling it because something happened at my cousin's engagement party in October that I've been turning over in my head ever since. And I think I finally understand what it meant. The engagement party was held at a venue in Burlington, one of those converted heritage buildings with exposed brick and Edison bulbs, and a bar that serves only local craft beer and natural wine. My cousin had done well for herself. The space was beautiful. I drove down from Toronto on a Friday afternoon and got stuck in the 403 traffic for an hour and 40 minutes, which meant I arrived with flat hair and low blood sugar and approximately 0 patience for the evening ahead of me. My mother and father had driven down the day before to stay with my aunt. I found this out via a group text that included my sister, my brother-in-law, and my aunt, but not me. I don't know if that was deliberate or just one of those omissions that happen so often in my family that they've stopped feeling like accidents. I found out because my sister mentioned it in a separate message to me. Did you know Mom and Dad are already in Burlington? They drove yesterday. And I said, no, I didn't know that. And she said, oh. And that was the end of it. I had booked myself a room at a hotel 12 minutes from the venue. I had learned, over the years, that staying with family during family events is a specific kind of torture I no longer needed to inflict on myself. One daughter is a doctor. The other one. Ad bil. The other I penal. Plate we rin de setter. In a cluster with 2 other couples I didn't recognize. My mother was laughing at something. She had on a deep burgundy blazer and her good earrings, which meant she'd been preparing for this for at least a week. She looked up when I walked in, and for one moment her face did the thing where it doesn't quite settle. Like she's calibrating, deciding what register to use, and then she smiled and said, "There she is." Not my name. Just, "There she is." My aunt hugged me. She's my mother's older sister, and she has always been warmer than my mother in the way that some older siblings are. Like they got a slightly different version of the family's emotional resources. She squeezed my arm and said, "You look wonderful, sweetheart. How's Toronto treating you?" "Really well," I said. "Busy, but good." My father patted my shoulder. "He's not a hugger." He said, "Long drive?" "Not bad," I said, which was not true, but it was the kind of question that doesn't actually want a true answer. My mother gestured vaguely toward the 2 couples and said, "These are friends of your aunt's from the club. And this is," she paused, the tiny pause that I have learned to dread, "my younger daughter. She's in IT. I am not in IT. I build distributed systems for a cloud infrastructure company. I lead a team of 11 engineers. In the past year, my team shipped a reliability upgrade that reduced client downtime by 63%, which sounds like a dry statistic until you understand that our clients include 3 provincial health networks and a national logistics company that moves medical supplies. The downtime we prevented was not theoretical, but I did not say any of that. I smiled at my aunt's friends from the club and said it was nice to meet them, and then I went to find the bar. The seating for dinner was arranged at round tables of 8, with place cards. I found my name on a card and followed it to my table. It was near the back of the room, tucked beside the DJ booth that wasn't running yet. Close enough to the speakers that I knew by the end of the night, I'd be leaning forward to hear anything anyone said. My cousin, who I love, had clearly delegated the seating to someone who didn't know me well enough to understand that putting me beside an inactive DJ booth was not the same as giving me a good seat. I didn't blame her. There was a lot to organize. The other people at my table were a mix. A friend of the groom's from university, a co-worker of my cousin's, whose name I immediately forgot, and then felt too awkward to ask again. A couple who seemed to know each other but not anyone else. And a man sitting 2 seats to my left, who was reading something on his phone, when I sat down and looked up and nodded in the way that people nod when they're being polite, but not necessarily inviting conversation. I decided I was fine with that. The first hour was the cocktail portion, which meant mingling, which is its own particular kind of effort when you've driven 2 hours and your family has already reminded you, within 10 minutes of arriving, exactly where you stand in the hierarchy. I spoke to my cousin, who was radiant and grateful, and pulled me into a hug that felt real. I spoke to my brother-in-law about the Leafs, because that's what we talk about when we don't know what to talk about. I accepted a glass of something orange and Herbie from a tray and stood near the window for a while and watched the light go down over the escarpment. At some point my mother materialized beside me. "Your father and I were thinking," she said, in the tone she uses when she's already decided, "that next summer we'd do a cottage week. The whole family. Your sister and her husband are already excited." "That sounds nice," I said. "We'd need everyone to commit early. Deposits and everything." She paused. "It depends on if people can get time off." The way she said people, I understood she meant me. She has never fully understood what I do, but she has somehow formed the impression that I have very little flexibility, and also that this flexibility, or lack of it, is a character flaw. "I have vacation time," I said. "I haven't taken most of it this year." "Right," she said, in a tone that suggested she didn't quite believe this. There was a moment of silence, not a comfortable one. "You should go say hello to your aunt's friend Marjorie," my mother said. "She has a son about your age. He works in finance." I did not go say hello to Marjorie. I went to find my table and sit down because dinner was starting. This is the part of the story where I need to explain something about the man sitting 2 seats to my left. His name, I would eventually learn, was Terrence. He was the groom-to-be's former manager. He'd worked in the same industry for about 20 years, which put him somewhere in his late 40s. Though he had the particular kind of unhurried ease that some people develop when they've stopped trying to prove things. He was there because my cousin's fiancé had stayed in touch with him after changing jobs, which is the kind of thing that happens when a manager is actually good at their job. He had driven up from Hamilton. He was not, as far as I could tell, particularly interested in making conversation either. We sat in companionable quiet through the salad course. The friend of the groom was telling a long story to the couple across the table. The coworker of my cousin's was on her phone under the table, in a way she seemed to think was subtle. Terrence said eventually, "Long drive?" "From Toronto," I said. "Not terrible. The 403 was backed up. Always is on Fridays." "Yeah." He picked up his fork. "What do you do in Toronto?" I considered for a moment saying IT, the way my mother had. It would have been easier. It was a party, not a networking event. But there was something about the straightforwardness of the question. No assumptions in it, no register calibrating pause, that made me answer honestly. "I'm a software engineer," I said. "Cloud infrastructure. I run a team." He looked up. Not the polite look, but an actually paying attention look. "What company?" I told him. He set his fork down. "Seriously?" I said. "Yes. Your company did the reliability work for the Ontario Health Networks," he said. "It wasn't a question." "My team led that project," I said. "I was the lead architect on the back-end systems." He looked at me for a moment in a way that felt like reevaluation. Not unkind, just genuine. That was a significant piece of work, he said. We followed it in the industry. It was written up. It was, I said. I didn't say that I was the one who'd been quoted in the write-up. There's a particular kind of restraint you learn as a woman in technical fields about how much to say and when. I had gotten good at that restraint, sometimes too good. What made you focus on health networks? He asked. And we talked. Not networking talk. Not party talk. Actually talked. About distributed systems and latency tolerances and what it means to build something that has to work the first time, because the second time isn't an option. He knew enough to ask real questions. I knew enough to give real answers. The salad plates were cleared. The main course came. I ate a piece of salmon and didn't notice I was eating it. At some point during this conversation, I became aware that my father had approached our table. He does this at parties, circuits the room. He's a sociable person, in the way that some engineers are sociable, methodical, slightly formal, interested in people in a category-based way. He came to our table to say hello to the groom's friend, who he'd apparently met earlier, and then he noticed Terrence and extended a hand. Evening, my father said. How do you know the couple? Terrence shook his hand. I was Elliot's manager a few years back. You? Father of the bride's cousin, my father said, which is a slightly odd thing to say. But my father has always described family positions the way you might describe org chart positions. This is my daughter. There was a small moment, the kind you only notice in retrospect, where my father's introduction of me was exactly as much as my mother's had been. This is my daughter. Full stop. Not what I do, not who I am. Just a position in a structure. Terrence said, pleasantly, I know. We've been talking. Do you know what your daughter's team built for the Ontario Health Networks? My father looked at me. Then at Terrence. She works in computers, he said. There was a beat of silence. Terrence said, still pleasantly, with no sharpness in it at all. And I think the lack of sharpness was what made it land the way it did. She was the lead architect on an infrastructure project that's currently supporting 3 provincial health systems. It was published. It's being cited as a case study in the field right now. Your daughter is quite well regarded in her industry. My father looked at me. I did not look away. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't even particularly satisfied. I was just tired, in the specific way you get tired when something has been true for a long time and the people closest to you are only now encountering it from the outside. I didn't know that, my father said. Which was honest. I'll give him that. It was one of the more honest things he'd said to me in years, because he said it to himself as much as to either of us. I didn't know that. You could ask her, Terrence said. And then he picked up his fork and went back to his salmon in the manner of a man who had said his piece and was finished. My father stood there for another moment. Then he said, I'll let you enjoy your dinner, and moved on. I looked down at my plate. My mother found me later, near the end of the night, while the dancing was starting, and people were migrating toward the bar. She appeared at my elbow with the particular purposefulness of someone who has been thinking about something and decided to stop thinking and start doing. Your father told me what that man said, she said. I waited. I didn't know, she said. About the health networks. I know, I said. You never talk about your work. I considered how to respond to this. The accurate response would have been, I stopped talking about my work because every time I tried, you changed the subject or asked me if I was seeing anyone or mentioned a nephew of someone from your book club who was also in computers. The accurate response would not have been useful. It's hard to talk about, I said instead. It's technical. It's not easy to explain at a dinner party. You could try, she said, which was true. And also, at this point, felt like being told to try swimming after someone spent 10 years draining the pool. I said, yeah, I could. We stood there for a moment. The dance floor was filling up. My cousin was spinning in the center of it with her fiancé, her dress catching the light. My mother said, "I'm proud of you." And then, before I could respond to that, I just don't always know how to show it. I don't know what I expected to feel when she said that. I think I expected something to break open. Or break loose. Some relief valve releasing pressure I'd been carrying for a long time. But what I actually felt was quieter than that. Not cold, not angry, just settled, in a way. Like a room after the windows have been closed. "I know, Mom," I said. And I meant it. Not as absolution, not as an invitation to pretend the last decade hadn't happened, but as a statement of fact. I do know. I've always known that her inability to see me wasn't hatred. It was a smaller thing than that, which in some ways made it harder to hold. You can't argue with smallness. You can't confront an oversight. You can only decide what to carry forward and what to leave in the parking lot when you get in your car and drive back to your life. I hugged her. It was a real hug, the kind that reaches the chest. I drove back to my hotel at 11:30. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going inside. The air was cold, the way October air in Ontario gets cold. That particular sharpness that smells like the last of the leaves coming down. I thought about Terrence. I thought about the fact that he had said those things, not to be kind to me, exactly, but because they were true and he was someone who said true things. I thought about how it hadn't felt like rescue. It had felt like being seen by someone who had no reason to pretend otherwise. I thought about my father standing at that table saying I didn't know that, and the fact that the sentence contained no excuse, just the bare fact of his not knowing. I thought that there was something in that worth keeping, even if it wasn't an apology. I thought about my mother at the window, saying "I'm proud of you," in a voice that sounded like she was also saying sorry, and saying it to herself as much as to me. None of it fixed anything. But I want to be honest about that. About the fact that it didn't fix anything, and I was okay. I've built systems designed to withstand failure. I know that a thing doesn't have to be perfectly repaired to still function. You can have incomplete data and still make good decisions. You can have a family that doesn't fully see you and still know exactly who you are. I went inside. I got into bed. I opened my laptop and looked at the project dashboard for 20 minutes before I caught myself doing it and closed the laptop. I am 32 years old. I lead a team of 11 engineers. We build things that have to work the first time, because in our industry, the second time is not always an option. My mother calls it that tech thing. And I think now that maybe the point was never to get her to call it something else. The point was to keep building anyway. The point was to know what I was building, even when no one else in the room did. I fell asleep with the curtains open and the parking lot lights coming through. Orange and steady. Like a system running exactly as designed. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that night in Burlington. Not in a dramatic way. Just in the quiet, practical way you think about systems. What feeds into what? What a single input can do to a chain of outputs that nobody planned for. Terrence didn't know my family. He didn't know the decades of dinners where I sat across from my parents and spoke about my work and watched their eyes go politely blank. He didn't know about the group texts I wasn't included in, or the introductions that reduced me to computers and moved on. He just knew what was true. He knew what my team had built because he worked in an industry that paid attention to things that worked. And because he was someone who said true things when true things were relevant, he said one. That's all it was. One true sentence at the right moment. And I watched my father hear it the way you hear something for the first time that was always there. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody tells you when you're younger. It doesn't always feel like justice when it arrives. It doesn't feel like a door slamming or a score being settled. It feels quieter than that. It feels like a window being opened in a room that's been shut for too long. I had spent years trying to open that window myself. Tried explaining my work over holiday dinners. Tried sending my mother articles that mentioned my company. Tried, In the patient and slightly desperate way you try things when you still believe the right words will finally land. None of it worked. Not because the words were wrong, but because I was the one saying them, and when you are the person who has already been categorized, your words arrive pre-sorted. They don't disrupt the category. They just get filed into it. What disrupted the category was someone with no stake in maintaining it. I think about that a lot, about how the most clarifying moments in your life often come not from the people who love you, but from the people who simply see you clearly, without the accumulated weight of everything they expected you to be. Terrence saw a professional who had done significant work. He said so. It cost him nothing and changed something. And what changed wasn't my parents. I want to be careful about that. My mother saying, "I'm proud of you" at the end of the night. I believed her, and I also understood it was a beginning, not an arrival. People don't transform at engagement parties. They don't reverse decades of habit over salmon and craft beer. What changed was smaller and more durable than that. What changed was that the information was now in the room. My father couldn't unknow it. My mother couldn't unmake that moment of silence. Whatever they did with it after was up to them. What I could control was what I carried home. I've always believed that how you do your work, the honesty of it, the care of it, the willingness to keep doing it, even when no one in the room understands what it is, matters independently of whether anyone sees it. That's not a comfortable belief. It doesn't make the dinners easier, or the introductions less stinging. But it's the one that has kept me functional. It's the one that got me to 32 with a team I respect, and work I'm proud of, and a clear sense of who I am, even when the people who raised me can't quite locate me. Integrity, I think, is just that, knowing what you're building, even when you're the only one in the room who knows. Intelligence is understanding that being seen by the right people, at the right time, is not luck. It's the long return on doing real work. And resilience is getting back in the car after a difficult evening, driving to your hotel, and sleeping with the curtains open because you don't need the dark to feel settled anymore. The parking lot lights were orange and steady. I was fine.